Train Yourself by International Master Andrew Martin. Most chess players want to improve their chess, but how do we go about this? It's not just the weaker players who want to improve. This applies to the strongest players, whether it be Grandmaster, right down to county players, home or occasional players. Everybody says they want to get better, but only a few succeed. The object of this tape is to help you to get better at chess, to help you to train yourself. One of the most difficult tasks imaginable is to sit down at the chessboard with a chess book or perhaps a score sheet and to actually work something out for yourself, to get the most out of the information you have in front of you. Everybody says, yes, but if only I knew the right way to go about it. Well, I hope that this tape will help you to do that. We'll tackle the problem from various angles, the first of which is analysing games, which I think is possibly the most important thing you can do when you want to improve. We'll look at this from 2 points of view, the first of which is analysing other people's games, and the second of which is analysing your own games. We'll take it in this order because I think analysing other people's games you'll do more often than looking at your own games. So let's imagine that you're sitting alone at home with a chessboard and a book. So what I suggest you do is to get a pen and paper and get your chessboard in front of you, and then we'll go on. You're interested in learning as much as you can from the game, but you find it difficult when there are no notes and no guidelines to help you. So how can you make the most out of this situation? Now, the reason you have a pen and paper is that to make notes is a very important tool for the improving player. It improves your all-round knowledge of the game and you remember much more. How often have you heard somebody say, I've seen that somewhere before, but I forgot it? Well, don't let that happen to you. It's better to remember a small amount of information well than to have a massive amount in the back of your mind and yet you can't remember it when you need to. So what should you write down? Well, essentially anything of interest. We'll now go through a game closely and I'll show you how I would approach the subject. This game was from a short match to decide the Championship of Belgrade in 1985 between two Yugoslavian grandmasters, Ivanovic and Matulovic. We'll go through the game twice, and the first time I'll give you just the bare game score. So write the game score out and play it through on your board fairly quickly. We won't make any notes. We'll go straight on to the game. Ivanovic was white and it was a Caro-Kann defence. 1 e4, c6, 2 d4, d5, 3 knight d2, d takes e4, 4 knight takes e4, knight f6, 5 knight takes f6, e takes f6, 6 bishop e3, bishop f5, 7 bishop d3, bishop g6, 8 queen e2, bishop e7, 9 knight f3, knight d7, 10 castles long, queen a5, 11 king b1, bishop takes d3. 12, rook takes d3, and black castled short. 13, bishop d2, queen d8. 14, knight h4, g6. 15, knight f5, rook e8. 16, knight h6 check, king g7. 17, queen h5, knight f8. 18, queen h3, queen d7. 19, g4, bishop d6. 20, rook g1, knight e6. 21, knight f5 check, king g8. 22, d5, c takes d5. 23, rook takes d5, g takes f5. 24, g takes f5 check, knight g5. 25, queen d3, queen e7. 26, rook takes d6, rook a d8. 27, rook takes d8, rook takes d8. 28, queen c3, queen d6. 29, bishop c1, king f8. 30, h4, knight e4. 31, bishop h6 check, king e7. 32, rook e1, queen d1 check. 33, bishop c1, rook d4. 34, f3, and black resigned. Right, now what do you make of this game? You've got the book, you've got only the bare game score, and you've just played it through very quickly. How can you get the most out of what you've seen? Right, have you set up the pieces? Well, I feel there are several things we have to do when we look at a game. Most people would make notes on the opening, and this can be very valuable. But during a game of chess, there are a number of critical points at which people took decisions. A lot of the moves anybody could play in any game, but there are some points at which a grandmaster will make a different move from the average or club player. Our object is to find these critical points and to look at them a bit more closely. Also very important is to write down your own opinions on the moves that were played. This will help you when you read the notes back afterwards to see exactly what you were thinking about at the time and exactly how you felt about the moves that were being played. That's very important in determining your style of play. Don't be afraid to voice your opinions. If you think a move was rubbish, say so. Analysis might prove you wrong later on, but it's not a bad thing to have a judgment on a position. So we'll go through the game again, more slowly, using notes which I've made. What I suggest you do is listen to my notes and then afterwards make your own notes on the game and then compare the two sets of notes. We'll go back to the starting position and we'll begin. Right, 1 e4, c6, 2 d4, d5, 3 knight d2. This is the position in diagram 1. Now the first thing that occurs to me is, why does white play knight d2 as opposed to knight c3? So I went to my openings book and I had a look. And the reason is supposed to be that if white plays 3 knight c3, then black can play 3 g6, after which white can't reinforce the centre by playing c2, c3, and consequently his d pawn might be a little weak. This method of play was thought at one time to equalise for black. Well, it seems to me that white should retain a slight advantage in this line. 3 knight c3, g6, 4 knight f3, bishop g7, 5 h3. The reason for this is that black's bishop at c8 might not have anywhere to go later on. So black usually resorts to messing up the game a little bit by playing knight h6 on the fifth move, followed by f7, f6 and knight h6 to f7. Not at all a stupid idea, although the manoeuvre knight h6 to f7 looks a little bit obscure because black might get in the move e7, e5 later on. Nevertheless, I think that white should be a little better in this position. And this is the main reason why people play knight d2. It doesn't really make much difference. But the reason is that after g6 by black now, white can play c2, c3. And this, to some extent, restricts the action of the bishop on g7. So it's a very small refinement, but these sort of details make up the mind of a chess player. A good chess player might prefer knight c3 to knight d2, but he will have reasons for doing so, and the main reason is that he knows about this g6 idea. So that's the first thing. Quite interesting, really. So we'll go on with the game. Black preferred to play a more normal plan. He played d takes e4, 4 knight takes e4, and now we reach the main line of the Caro-Kann. 4 knight f6, 5 knight takes f6, e takes f6. The next question that occurred to me was, why did black play e takes f6? Well, this was a match of 8 games, and in a short match, generally at the start, you don't want to lose a game, because losing any one game in a match like this is critical, because you have less time to get it back. E takes f6 is a very solid move, but it's very boring. The main line runs 6 bishop c4, and black is supposed to play queen e7 check. This is an interference theme. It tends to block up the development of the white pieces, mainly because he can't play bishop e3, because queen b4 check picks off the bishop on c4. So white is forced to interposed 7 queen e2, and then black's supposed to play bishop e6, and the whole game gets very boring. Bishop and the queens come off on e6. And in general, black is playing for a draw when he plays e takes f6. Anderson likes to play the black position, but in these dry types of game, he's out on his own really, because not many people are temperamentally suited to this type of position. Incidentally, I found one example where Korchnoi tried out e takes f6 against Karpov in their match in Baguio City, 1978. So the position in diagram 2 is the position after 5 e takes f6, and we'll look how Korchnoi got the worst position when he tried to deviate from this queen swap with queen e7 check very quickly. After e takes f6, Karpov played 6 bishop c4. Korchnoi played knight d7. Karpov 7 knight e2. Bishop d6. 8 castle short. Castle short. 9 bishop f4. Knight b6. 10 bishop d3. Bishop e6. 11 c3. Knight d5. 12 bishop takes d6. Queen takes d6. 13 queen d2. Rook a d8. 14 rook fe1. g6. 15 rook a d1. I didn't consider it necessary to go any further with this particular example, because I felt that white had all the long-term chances, simply because he has this 4-3 majority on the queen side. In this game, Karpov patiently prepared the advance of this majority and should really have won later on. Now, if you're a bit bemused by the intricacy and depth of this example, I'm just trying to show you how I would approach this problem. At the start, there's no reason for you to go into such depth, but it's useful when you're looking at the nature of an opening, if you want to find out the real truth, to go into this depth and to have a look at previous examples of the opening. All of this points to the real nature of 5 e takes f6. It may well equalise with correct play, but if you want to play for a win as black, it would be better to try something else. Perhaps 5 g takes f6, as recommended in the games of Basman and Keane. Right, we'll go back to the position in diagram 2 now. Have you got the position in diagram 2 now? Fine. Well, Ivanovic went on 6 bishop e3. Slightly unusual move this, but presumably white is trying to effect a favourable transposition into the variation with bishop c4. Do you remember that black played queen e7 check and white couldn't block the check with bishop e3? Well, I think this was what Ivanovic was trying to avoid, this queen e7 check move when he played bishop e3. Anyway, Matulovic developed his bishop actively with 6 bishop f5. It occurred to me he could have played bishop e6, but that's a little bit negative. It's true, it does stop bishop c4 from white, but after a move like knight f3 or bishop d3, white has the easier time developing his pieces. And don't forget, the recurrent theme in this variation, white's queenside ball majority. After 6 bishop f5, 7 bishop d3, Matulovic retreated with bishop g6. The next thing that occurred to me was bishop g6 necessary? We're all taught that in the opening you don't move the same piece twice, And was there a threat? In the third game of the match, Matulovic came up with a much better solution to Black's problems in the opening. After 7 bishop d3, he produced the very surprising bishop d6. What's this, you ask? Doesn't it leave a piece on pre? Well, Grandmaster Ivanovic decided not to take this piece. He played 8 knight f3, and Matulovic left the piece on pre again, castled short. This is crazy, the two grandmasters, you're saying, but after 9 bishop takes f5, Matulovic revealed his hand. He played 9 queen a5 check. After the further queen d2, queen takes f5, Black didn't have a bad game. He was ahead in development, and he could look forward to pressurising the white centre later on. He played knight d7, rook a d8, rook f e8, and c5, and managed to equalise. So, if we're looking for the source of Black's problems in this game, in my opinion, the move bishop g6 starts the rot. Black should be thinking about developing his pieces, not retreating an already developed piece when it wasn't necessary. So bishop g6 looked to me to be the first bad move by Black. Put the pieces back to the position after 7 bishop g6. White continued to develop with 8 queen e2. And Black played bishop e7. Again, a move I wouldn't have played. I don't like the e7 square for the bishop. It doesn't seem to be doing very much there, apart from blocking some check on the e-file. I think Black had a chance to correct his mistake by playing bishop takes d3 after queen e2, and then after 9 queen takes d3 to play bishop from f8 d6. The bishop on f8 really belongs on d6 in this position, it seems to me. A more active square. It's looking out in both directions, along the h2 to b8 diagonal and along the a3 to f8 diagonal. But Black missed this opportunity, and he plays his bishop to this very passive square on e7. So if I were annotating this game, I'd just put 2 passive down against this bishop e7 move. I don't like it. After bishop e7, 9 knight f3 was played, 9 knight d7, 10 castles long, queen a5, 11 king b1. No notes for these moves, it's unnecessary. I think this sort of development will be played by many players. But it's about here that White starts to build up an attack. And the next thing which I would want to consider was, how did he manage to build up an attack from this position? Well, an attack doesn't materialise by magic. Certain things have to be happening. And in this position, White has a number of significant positional advantages. The first of which is he has a space advantage. The second of which is Black hasn't castled yet. And the third thing is that White has this 4-3 pawn majority on the queen side, a factor which I will keep repeating throughout the game because I think it's very important. If you look at the White position, you don't see any weaknesses. And there's nothing for Black to fasten onto. He can't find an active plan. So, this means that Black has to conduct a thankless task. He has to defend for a draw, really. He can't hope to win if White plays solidly. and that's not very pleasant at all. Having said all this, white has to translate his advantage into something concrete. For example, the win. And black has to make the best of a bad job here, so I would expect him to have castled long. He didn't. He played 11 bishop takes d3. White played 12 rook takes d3, and black castled short. Right, two things spring to mind. The first of which is that white's rook is very actively placed on d3. It can swing along the third rank in either direction, and now that black has castled short, it can perhaps look to go to g3 or h3 in the near future with an attack on the black king. Now the position in diagram 3 is the position with black's king stuck in the middle. Why, you say, didn't black castle long? Well, set up the position in diagram 3. I'm sure Matulovic wanted to castle long in this position because it's the natural thing to do. But he couldn't, because after 12 castles long, white would have played 14 bishop d2 with a discovered attack on the bishop at e7. Black plays his only move, bishop on e7 to b4. And now we see the excellent posting of the white rook with 14 rook a3. What can black do? Queen a5 to b5 loses a piece. So after 14 queen b6, 15 rook b3 picks off the bishop at b4. Very embarrassing for black. Now he has to castle short. He's castling into the full force of white's attack. Right, on we go. Back to diagram 3 now, please. After castle short, white began to clear the third rank. He played 13 bishop d2. He wants to see the rook in action against the black king. In addition, bishop d2 forces black's hand somewhat because the bishop on e7 is attacked, and black has to retreat. 13 queen d8, hampering the action of his own rooks. 14 knight h4. I like this move. If I were playing with white, I'd feel confident that my attack would be crashing home here. The f5 square is a very strong one for a white knight. So black tries to keep it out. He plays 14 g6. But now comes a series of crushing blows, which I'm sure we'd all like to play. It's just a question of building up the position to be able to do it. White played 15 knight f5. A lot of chess players go goo-goo gaga over this sort of attack, but it's not really surprising, is it, that white's attack is very strong here. The problem is that none of black's pieces can come to the defence of his king. Look at the bishop on e7 and the knight on d7. Look at black's rooks. What can they do to frustrate or inhibit a white attack? It's also true that black's pawn structure is extremely inflexible. The pawns on f6 and f7 act as a wall, stopping the black pieces from getting to the defence of the king. And so this knight f5 is a nice move to see, but fairly routine. Now the acceptance of white's sacrifice, in case you were wondering, leads to disaster. Black ends up with a shattered position after a variation such as g takes f5, 16 queen h5, rook e8, 17 rook g3 check, king h8, 18 queen takes f7, rook g8, 19 rook takes g8 check, queen takes g8, 20 queen takes e7. And with careful play, white should win this position. If you are mystified by any of these moves, take time out to try and look at the moves again and endeavour to see why they were played. I hope eventually you'll agree with my assessment of the final position. When you attack, take into consideration the balance of forces in the specific area of the board of the attack. Here, white was a piece down in material terms for a few moves, but in attacking terms he was a rook and a queen ahead, so in fact he had an overwhelming advantage in material. Back to diagram 4 now, please, and we'll go on with the game. After knight f5 or move 15, black tried to improve the communications between his pieces. He played 15 rook e8. If black got the opportunity, I'm sure he would drop a piece back to f8. Given 2 exclamation marks. Well, yes, it's worth 2 exclamation marks, but for a somewhat different reason than would be immediately appreciated. In essence, it's a quiet move that decides the game, because black is faced with this overwhelming concentration of white attacking force around his king. And he just can't contest this. Black struggled on after 17 queen h5, so go back to the position in diagram 5 and we'll continue. After queen h5, black played knight f8. My note would be struggling to coordinate the defence, but at least now he threatens to take the queen off and the knight from f8 can go to g6, defending along the g file. So white is forced to retreat. He plays 18 queen h3, queen d7. Black's desperate to swap off pieces. One important point to remember is that if you're defending against an attack, try and swap off as many pieces as possible, because in this way you reduce the chances that the attacker has by swapping off all his attacking pieces for your defensive pieces. But white was having none of that. He played 19 g4. Bishop d6, 20 rook g1, and black played 20 knight e6. Now it's clear that the pressure is continuing to build up on black. Imagine you're defending this position. Well, if we're taking notes on this game, I have to imagine that I'm defending black's position. I wouldn't have played knight e6 here, I'm pretty sure of that. It occurs to me that if you're defending with no hope of counterplay other to sit and let your opponent waste his attack on you and hope to weather the storm, you must try and keep your pieces as far away as possible from the opposition. If they come close, you tend to set yourself up for combinational ideas. The knight on e6 in fact sets black up for a combination like that and blocks the action of his queen on d7, which to some extent restricted the pawn at g4 from advancing because white didn't want to swap off queens. Put the knight back on f8 and we'll play black's best move, which is king from g7 to h8. Again, if this seems surprising to you, try and understand the reasoning behind such a move. I'm getting my king out of the way of the rook on g1 and some sort of discovered attack on the g file. I'm keeping my knight as far away as possible from the white attacking forces. Maybe I can get some counterplay on the queen side later on, or in the e-file. Maybe. But for the moment, I must be patient, and I must try and get my pieces out of the way of the white attack, and make it as difficult as possible for him to implement and put into effect this attack. So King h8 is a sensible idea, however strange it may seem at first sight. I feel the Grandmaster should have been aware of this type of defensive device. And I don't like knight e6 at all. In fact, Matulovic's whole conduct of the game is pretty poor, in my opinion. If you come to the same conclusion when you look at a game, put it down. Write it down on the paper. Very important, this. At some stage during your chess career, you'll be called upon to defend your opinions on the chessboard, to defend your ideas. It'll be your ideas against those of your opponent, especially in a very critical game. The more sure you are of the correctness of your ideas, the more easy it is to play in a confident manner and to find difficult moves when difficult moves need to be found. This is very important, this concept of confidence in chess. A lot of people lack the necessary confidence at difficult moments. Writing things down in this way and thinking about the game in these terms helps to boost your confidence in difficult periods. So back to the game, and enough of all that. After 20 knight e6, Ivanovic played 21 knight f5 check. And again this sacrifice, but now it's with renewed strength. Now Matulovic discovered to his horror, again, that he'd set himself up in a rather nice way, because after 21 g takes f5, 22 g takes f5 check, knight g5, white has the pretty 23 rook takes g5 check, f takes g5, 24 f6 check, picking off the queen at d7. That's rather nice, but again, wholly logical. White's position is better, his pieces are better posted, so it's not surprising that this type of combination exists. Matulovic managed to see that, and again, in answer to a knight check, he was obliged to retreat his king. He played 21 king g8, and white played 22 d5. Now, if you're not familiar with the basic principles behind attacking play, one of the most important principles is that you shouldn't allow the defender any respite. And d5 is doing precisely that. All of white's pieces come into play, and still the rook on a8 is not doing anything. Still the bishop on d6 will be pinned against the queen. The knight on e6 is not well placed. The rook on e8 is not well placed. White's exploiting all of these defects in the black position before black can get a chance to recuperate. 22 c takes d5. 23 rook takes d5. Black's forced to take on f5 to avoid losing material. G takes f5. 24 g takes f5 check, knight g5, 25 queen d3, 25 queen e7, 26 rook takes d6, rook a d8, again desperately trying to swap off pieces. White doesn't mind now because black's structure on the king side is shattered. 27 rook takes d8, rook takes d8, 28 queen c3. Well, this is a surprising move from a certain point of view, because white sets himself up for a knight fork on e4. But after seeing this knight fork superficially, it occurred to me after thinking about it for a while that this e4 thought was irrelevant. OK, black removes his king from the pin on the g-file, sticks his knight on e4, but white retains enough attacking resources to frustrate black's every try in this position. So another rule of attacking play, don't get carried away. White's happy to simplify in the middle of his attack if that's the easiest way to win. He's happy to swap off pieces if it can come down to a one endgame. So I would write that down. Be patient in the middle of your attack. Don't get carried away. Right, we'll go on. 28 queen c3. Queen to d6. Black's trying desperately to set up some chiefo on the black rank. 29 bishop c1. King f8. One final note. I would have written down what happens after 29 queen takes h2. Think about it for a second before continuing. Did you find 30 queen takes f6 when white wins easily? So black's just played king f8. White played 30 h4. And black dropped his knight into e4, the last chance. A check came on h6 with a bishop. King e7. 32 rook e1. And a last panic-stricken attempt by black. He stuck his queen to d1 with check. So white was very relaxed now. He knew the game was under control. And his bishop from h6 just dropped back to c1, threatening the knight on e4. And what can black do? He tried rook d4, and after 34 f3 he was forced to resign. There are no tricks left, and the knight's dropping off on e4. So that was quite a nice game. What did I write down in conclusion? Well, these were my notes. Let's get it clear that you won't be able to play a game like this every day of the week. It's nice to know that if your opponent plays poorly, however, you would feel confident enough to take advantage of it, and sometimes in the most crushing style. I made the point that if I were Matulovic after this game, I wouldn't feel much like going near a chessboard for a while. But when I looked at the match, he did fight back. He drew the next 3 games, and he won game 5. So he managed to recover from this crushing defeat in good style. This ends the section on analysing other people's games. We've gone into it in some detail because I feel it's very important, and you will see how much information we've managed to assemble from a bare game score. It took me a long time to look at this game, a few hours at least, and I feel when you look at a game you should look at the games in this depth if you want to improve. Hopefully everything that you write down you'll remember if you look at the game enough and it's of sufficient interest. This is not to say that every game should be analysed in this detail, but at the start I feel it's beneficial to do so, just to get your brain working and analysing in the right way. Now we'll go on to another interesting topic, looking at your own games. How does this differ? The game that we're about to look at was disappointing for me. It was played in a weekend tournament in which both myself and my opponent were fighting for first prize. From the financial angle it was disappointing, but from a chess angle it was equally disappointing because I was crushed. And if you are a strong player, you don't like to be crushed because it means your ideas have basically been defeated in that game, and that for me is the most important thing. My opponent was Paul Littlewood, very good attacking player, but I felt that he was at his weakest when he was being attacked. The game began 1 d4, knight f6, 2 c4, c5, 3 d5, d6, 4 knight c3, g6, 5 e4, bishop g7, 6 bishop d3, castle short, 7 knight ge2, e6, 8 castle short, e takes d5, e takes d5, reaching the position in diagram 6. My analysis of the game afterwards started from this position. I was trying to find a decent plan for black. White's plan is obvious. He wants to attack on the king's side. He certainly set up the conditions for an attack, and he threatens f4, f5. If black routinely places his pieces in the e-file in this position, he may find that he's playing irrelevant moves, because all of white's pieces cover squares on the e-file, and black really has nothing to aim at. In addition, white is not going to put any of his pieces in the e-file. That's clear. If he plays knight g3, f4, f5, queen to f3, bishop to d2, etc., that plan is irrelevant. So where's black going to find his counterplay? A further problem is the bishop on c8. Where's it going? Bishop from c8 to g4 looks useless because white can block with f2, f3, forcing black to lose a tempo. Bishop to f5 doesn't look very good. The bishop on d3 can just take it. So, another problem, where's black going to develop his piece on c8? The only plan, it seemed to me, which was worthwhile at the time, was to prepare b7, b5. And the only way I could see of doing that was to play 9 knight a6, as I did. White replied 10 knight g3, rook e8, bishop f4. Note that rook e8 was a prophylactic measure against f2, f4, when black can play knight on f6 to g4, threatening the e3 square. In addition, he threatens queen on d8 to h4. So I did manage to stop white's plan for a while, anyway. But after bishop f4, I played knight on f6 to g4. The knight can come round to e5. I was fairly happy with my position at this stage. I remember thinking that I thought black had equalised at this stage. White played 12 queen d2, knight on a6 to c7, 13 h3, knight g5, knight g4 to e5, 14 rook fe1, rook b8, 15 bishop f1, and I played f7, f5. This is the position in diagram 7. Now, when you're looking through your own games, be as critical as you can, but try and be objective. Don't be overcritical about your moves. If you're playing moves at random, without thought, without a plan, then I think you should criticise yourself more than if you played a bad move with an idea. Ideas and plans are very important when you're playing chess. You should try and encourage yourself at all times to form ideas and to form plans at the board. Even if they're bad plans, at least you're going in the right direction. So I wrote it down after the game that f5 was part of the wrong plan. I did it to provide a retreat square for the knight on e5. It seemed to me that white was trying to play f4 as soon as possible, to knock the knight back from e5 and then to exploit the congested nature of black's position on the queen side by swapping on the e file and possibly bringing a rook on a1 to e1. But Littlewood exploited the fact that I'd loosened my position somewhat quite nicely now. He played 16 bishop g5. Queen to d7. f4. Knight f7. 18 bishop h4. a6. Still I'm trying to get in this b5 idea. 19 rook takes e8 check. Knight takes e8. 20 rook e1. Threatening rook e7. I played knight f6. 21 rook e6. Looking at it afterwards, I didn't see that I'd played too many bad moves so far, and yet we've arrived at a position which can only be called as very promising for white. Black's position is still congested. There's no clear means of achieving counterplay, and I've just got to sit and defend against white's initiative. Very unpleasant. So what did I do wrong? Well, I'm still puzzling over this. I don't think I've done anything wrong so far. It's just that the whole opening variation is unpromising from black's point of view. I tried to get in my plan, that's b7, b5, but here I haven't been able to achieve it quite clearly, and the white pieces have obtained dominating positions. I couldn't even produce any satisfactory alternatives from my point of view to have avoided this type of thing. So after rook e6 I was struggling. I had to go into a self-pin with queen d8. 22 queen e1 came, a very nice move. And I played bishop d7. This is the position in diagram 8. I feel that bishop takes e6 has to be analysed. After 22 bishop takes e6, 23 d takes e6, knight h6, 24 knight d5, a crushing square, queen f8, 25 e7, queen f7, 26 knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, 27 bishop takes f6, and on the next move white's going to queen his pawn. I did actually see all that at the board, and so this explains my refusal to accept the sacrifice of the rook at e6. But I must stress that when you're analysing at home, you must write down all the critical variations. And also try to write down your thoughts as they were at the time at the board. Try and make a conscious effort to remember what you were thinking about at the time, whether you were depressed, your changes in mood as the game went on, your thoughts at the time, your thoughts after the game. try and compare all your thoughts about the game, at the board and away from the board. Very important to see how they differ, so that you can analyse what sort of things you think about and whether you can be objective in a difficult position. It occurred to me that I somehow lost my objectivity here. I was too frustrated about having gotten a bad position in the first place. I played bishop d7, 23a4 was played. King f8, 24 bishop d3, and now I played bishop takes e6, 25d takes e6, queen e8. Again, if you think that black's getting away with it, you'll soon be surprised by white's next move. He played 26 bishop takes f5. This destructive type of sacrifice is interesting. White's going to be a lot of material down, but all of his pieces are working so well and all of black's pieces are working so poorly that it doesn't seem to matter very much. And in fact, I was quite unable to organise a defence at this point. I played 26 knight d8, but this is the position in diagram 9 after bishop takes f5, and we'll have a look at the critical lines in which black accepts the sacrifice on f5. Variation A, 26 g takes f5, (27) knight takes f5, knight h6, 28 e7 check, king g8, 29 knight takes h6 check, bishop takes h6, 30 bishop takes f6, bishop takes f4, 31 knight d5. You can see that the superb positioning of the white pieces makes it impossible for black to defend any longer. Back to the position in diagram 9. We were talking about accepting the sacrifice. One more line. 26g takes f5, knight takes f5, and let's assume that black plays knight h8, a further retreat of the knight. 28 e7 check, king g8, 29 bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, 30 queen into e6 check, queen has to block on f7, and 31 knight h6 check, picking up the entire black position. So you can see very quickly here, with two short variations, that black's position is very difficult, and some might say lost. So we'll go on after I played 26 knight d8. So back to diagram 9 now, and Littlewood played 27 knight to d5. Another very strong move. Knight takes d5, c takes d5, bishop takes b2, e7 check, king went to g7, Can you see what happens if 29 king f7 is played? E takes d8 equals knight check. Rook takes d8. Bishop to e6 check. King f8, 32 f5. The quiet move, but absolutely crushing. However, in the game, after king g7, Littlewood played 30 bishop to d7, crowning his fine performance, and I resigned. Well, it was irritating to lose a game in that way, to be absolutely wiped off the board. But to avoid this sort of disaster in the future, I tried to ask myself, why had I lost? I singled out a number of reasons for this. The first of which was that my opening variation was simply bad. Black got a passive position with no counterplay. I didn't manage to carry out my plan properly. I couldn't play b7, b5 at any stage. And at the end I became irrational. I was upset about losing a game in this way, and this annoyance affected my performance in the latter part of the game, when I might have been able to put up a better defence. Those were the reasons in a chess sense why I lost the game. In another sense, it occurred to me, looking at it, that I wasn't totally honest with myself about my assessments of a chess position, in particular about my own abilities. It was very clear to me that I wasn't a particularly good defender on seeing this game. And to put down the reasons for a loss is quite important, especially to be honest about it. And I tried, after the game, to improve my defensive play, to go home, look at examples in a book, or to go through various games that I played in which I didn't defend well, and to sort it all out. Look at the game again and see what conclusions you come to about this game. Why did Black lose? What did he do wrong? If you can see any further reasons, apart from the fact that I'm just a rubbishy player, I'd be grateful to hear from you. So there we are. We've examined games by other people and games which you would play yourself. Write everything down, make clear, concise notes, and try to be honest. Try to make your notes with pens of different colours. Try to make the notes stand out in some way, so that when you look back at them after a while, they'll hit you in the eye and you'll remember much more about what you were thinking about at the time. Try and mark the critical points in a game with asterisks or some punctuation, which makes it clear to you. And don't forget your opinions, please. Write down your thoughts at any stage. Don't be afraid to criticise the play of your opponent and of yourself, but in an objective way. We'll now move on to looking at specific areas of chess. How does one get the most out of looking at the opening, the middle game, the end game? What should you do? Well, how does one study the opening? This is a difficult question because it's all too easy to get bogged down in reams of analysis, in books which only confuse. Well, the most important thing to avoid is confusion, I feel. And when we analyse, we're looking for clarity. Looking at the opening is very much a personal thing. You've got to decide how much you think you can cope with and increase your knowledge only gradually. So what I suggest is that you keep it simple at the start. Be modest in your outlook and don't analyse too much. Again, I must reinforce what I said on side 1 of this tape. It's better to remember a small amount well than to have this massive amount of information, this large number of moves and memorised variations in the back of your mind. And you can't use them when you need to. So clarity and simplicity is the keynote to analysing the opening. Having said all this, again I must reinforce that you have to make notes about what you're looking at. A card index system is quite useful actually. Jotting down the important variations. I'll try and illustrate this. Now let's suppose you're looking for a new line to play with white against the Sicilian defence. You're fed up with the main lines, or perhaps you're coming to this opening for the first time. The Sicilian defence starts 1 e4 c5. You have a look around your books and you come to the conclusion that you want to play the move 2 c3. You feel there's less to learn initially, and the first idea is very clear. White wants to occupy the centre with a future d2, d4. So you take all your books, you put them in front of you, you get your little cards ready to jot down all the relevant information. You get your paper clips, you append the games that you play to the cards, and you're ready to jot down the relevant information. So what should you put down? Obviously not the whole book. If I were preparing myself from scratch in this opening, I would put it something like this. After e4, c5 to c3, this is the position in diagram 10. Black has a number of alternatives, by far the most important of which are firstly 2 knight f6, secondly 2 d5. These are the moves that will be played in 90% of c3 games. So in my card index system I will put down A, 2 knight f6, B, 2 d5, C, others, and use 3 separate cards for the notation of these variations. If you want to try this out at home, I'll now show you how much to put down on these cards. We'll take the first variation, 2 knight f6. Just a short note under this move might be useful. Black attacks the e4 pawn, therefore white advances it. And I would keep the information down on these cards minimal. White plays 3 e5, black plays 4 knight d5, white plays 4 d4, c takes d4, 5 c takes d4, knight c6, white plays 6 knight f3, black plays d6, white plays 7 bishop c4, knight b6, 8 bishop b5. Believe it or not, I would leave it there if you're just starting from scratch. It's not a confusing variation, and you can look up the further continuations in the book. But what you have there is a base, the start of a main line. I would suggest that you start playing now. You go out, you get examples in your own games of 2c3, and you continue to jot them down, thus building up all the information on the line. You might lose a few games at the start, but it's better just to be clear, very, very clear about this short sequence at the start. In particular, the mechanics of the attack on the e4 pawn at move 2 by black to knight f6, and the advance, the attempt by white to get some sort of space advantage and some sort of central position. Black tries to organise an attack on the centre with his knight c6 and his d6 idea, and white continues to develop his pieces. Bishop c4, we've seen the attack by the knight on b6 on the bishop at b5, and now black's ready to take a decision. Very simple concept this, very limited amount of information. Variation B is to d5. Again, I don't write down very much. In fact, I keep the information as limited as possible at the beginning. 2d5 forces white to make a decision in the centre. 3, e takes d5. Queen takes d5. 4, d4. Black will generally play e6. 5, knight f3. Knight f6. 6, bishop d3. A move like knight c6, or perhaps bishop e7. You can put that down as an alternative. And black and white castles with 7 castles short. And I would just stop there. We've reached a simple position in which white has got castled. If allowed, he's going to push the black queen out of the centre by playing c3, c4. You'll find, referring to the books, that black normally plays c takes d4 here, denying white this opportunity, and white will capture with c takes d4. Again, on his next turn, he's going to knock the black queen out of the centre with knight b1 to c3. But this is enough. Build up the information gradually. Let me repeat this over and over again. Don't hurry at the start, and don't be impatient to amass too much information, which could be confusing. Even if you're quite a strong player, 160, 170, maybe even stronger, it's better to start in these simple terms. You'll presumably know some more about this variation if you have the book handy or some information. But you can play from this position. You can play the position. Don't become too discouraged if you lose a few games at the start. Your understanding will be increasing as you're playing, as you're getting experience with the variation. And you can jot down more and more as you learn more and more. From a position in which you know very little, start with very little and work your way up. About variation C, which are the other third moves for black, I wouldn't put down anything at all at the moment. Does this sound rather strange? I advise that experience in a variation actually played over the board or in correspondence play is far more valuable than actually sitting at home with a book studying a variation up to the hilt before you go out and play it. Right, now let's suppose you've written all this down and you go out ready to play 2c3 with this very limited amount of information at your disposal. And then in your first game, the game begins like this. 1 e4 c5, 2 c3, and black plays 2 d6. Very uncooperative person he is too. What's this, you think? Well, you know the basic idea of the variation is to occupy the centre with 3 d2 d4. And you look at the position for a while and you think, well, there's not much stopping me from doing this, so I'm going to do that. 3 d2 d4. And then black immediately responds 3 knight g8 to f6. So you see an attack on the e4 pawn by the knight. You also see that by playing 2c3 you've blocked in your knight at b1 to a certain extent. It can't come out to its natural square at c3, and to defend at d2 seems to you to block in the bishop at c1. After thinking about the position for a while, you come to the conclusion that your alternatives are to play 4 f2 f3. You're not sure about that because it does weaken the position on your king side a little bit. You can play bishop on f1 to d3, defending the pawn, or you can play an interesting capture d takes c5, after which you've seen that d takes c5 by black leads to a better endgame for white after queen takes d8 check, and the black king might be in trouble in the centre. So, in a sense, you've approached this position in a very fresh way. You know what the idea is, d2, d4, and now you decide to play d takes c5. But now your opponent surprises you by playing immediately the move 4 knight to c6. Now you have to collect your thoughts here, because you are proceeding originally, you don't know anything about the variation, and it's clear that by playing this move immediately your opponent obviously knows something about it. It's a pawn sacrifice. So you see really that you either let his pieces out with c takes d6, knight takes e4, after which black's got a very free game, or you can play the very safe move f3. Now, after d takes c5, queen takes d8 check, knight takes d8, bishop e3, b6, knight a3, exclamation mark, the white pieces come into the game and he has in fact a slight advantage. There's a direct threat of knight b5, knight e6, bishop c4, and the white pieces come into the game with effect. Now this type of approach forces you to think carefully about the opening. I know a lot of players, especially at club level, who just play the opening moves extremely quickly without giving any thought to what they're doing. And really this way of playing is doomed to failure, because they're not actually examining properly the reasons why the moves are being played. This mechanism, even at the early stages of the game, is very valuable when you're trying to improve your chess. At the earliest stage, you're looking at the reasons behind the moves, you're trying to understand them, you're taking time for this process to sink in. So go ahead with your variation with 2c3. And if you can apply this technique to your own opening preparation, I believe that this is the right way to look at the opening. We now come on to the middle game. Well, not for one moment should we forget that the opening is very much linked to the middle game. If you decide to play specific opening variations or opening schemes, try and find games from the opening and play these through using the system of annotations we looked at earlier. Try to be analytical in your approach, but try to enjoy it. Don't become too serious about all this analysis. Do as much as you think you can and do as much as you enjoy. I'd stress this very much. Chess must be an enjoyment, a pleasure, not a trial. And you mustn't work under stress. So, again, do as much as you think you can cope with. Very important thing when you train yourself this to think about. So, the first thing when you're looking at the middle game is try and find games from opening variations that you play and look at them. Play them through and get a good idea of the middle game plans for either side in the variations that you play. Obviously you can't orchestrate every game in this way. You can't trap your opponent into playing your favourite variation all the time. In some cases it's going to be different. So what should you do? How do you train yourself? Well, apart from playing through games, looking at specific positions and trying to solve problems or puzzles can be very valuable. I have assembled a set of problems specifically for this tape, and I feel they're interesting, and you should try and analyse them, look at them and solve them before you go forward to the answers. So we'll go on now to the set of these problems. Problem 1 is the position in diagram 11. Try to solve this first before we go on. I'll give you a clue if you really want one. If not, turn off the tape and try and solve the problem. The clue is that if white was able to bring his queen to h7, he could checkmate. Is this possible to achieve? Did you find the spectacular series of moves starting with 1 rook h8 check, king takes h8, 2 rook h1 check, king g8, rook h8 check on move 3, king takes h8, queen from c1 to h1 check, and black's mated? Fantastic, isn't it? But it's a common sort of idea, this unclearing of the back rank in order to press home the attack forcefully. The position in diagram 12 comes from a game Tarash against Janowski from Ostend 1907. Again, it's white to move. Try and solve the problem and take as much time as you can over the solution before going on to the clue. The clue is that white would win if he could force home his pawns. How does he do this? He does this by a very nice trick. 1, queen takes f8 check, rook takes f8, 2, rook takes f8, queen takes f8. It's true that black could check at this point on c5, but then 3 d4 wins, forcing a transposition. Don't forget there's a mate on h7 if black doesn't capture on f8. Black captures, 2 queen takes f8, and now 3 h6 check, forcing king g8, 4 h7 check, and do you see now? White queen's one of his pawns, or ends up a rook ahead. That was very nice, but again, it was a forceful manoeuvre. White emphasises all the advantages of his position. And when we finish off an opponent, this is precisely the type of accuracy we need. Diagram 12 is a very famous combinational motif from the game Lasker against Bauer. Amsterdam, I think, 1887 or something like that. See if you can find the combinational motif before we go on. I'll give you a clue if you want to listen on. The clue is that white tries to remove the defensive potential of black's position by playing 1 knight h5. Black plays knight takes h5. Does this help you? Well, Lasker won very beautifully by playing bishop takes h7 check on move 2. King takes h7 by black. 3 queen takes h5 check. King g8. 4 bishop takes g7. This double bishop sacrifice was a revelation at the time, but we can see now that it quickly strips the black king of all its cover, and although black is 2 pieces up, he's quite hapless in view of the crushing white attack. The game finished. King takes g7, 5 queen g4 check, king h7, the black king trapped on the edge of the board. White brings his rook into the attack, 6 rook f3. Can you see the mechanics of this combination working? e5 to introduce the queen into the defence, 7 rook h3 check, queen h6, 8 rook takes h6 check, king takes h6, and now, just when it seemed that black was crawling out, 9 queen d7, and white forces a decisive win of material. Now, don't be too disheartened if you didn't get the solution to that, because some of these problems are easier than others. I'm not necessarily putting the easiest one first and the most difficult one last. I don't believe in ordering a structure in that way. It's too predictable and you know what's coming. So persevere. Diagram 13 comes from the game Pilnik-Reshevsky. Black has just played the move g5, g4. Now, what is the basic idea behind this move is the first question. And B, the second question is, what did white play and with what result? If you're baffled by this, the clue is quite simply that g4 is a terrible mistake, and white has a rather fantastic move to frustrate black's obviously winning position. Can you find it? The move is to queen f2, forcing, after 2 queen takes f2, stalemate. I don't suppose Reshevsky was too happy about that. He might have been in time trouble. I can't imagine that he wouldn't have seen this if he was thinking logically about the position. But it's rather nice. This stalemating device often happens in middle game positions, and maybe even in endgame positions, where the position becomes blocked. So try to look out for these sort of stalemate ideas and incorporate them into your armoury. Position 5, diagram 14. It's black to play and win with a nice combination. The clue is that black has to try and exploit white's weakened back rank. Can he do that? He does so with playing 1 rook e1 check, 2 rook takes e1, queen d4 check. Did you see that one? 3 queen takes d4, and now d takes e1 equals queen mate. A spectacular and very nice way to win. Diagram 6, position 15, please. This comes from a game Rosengarten against Schlammer, Solingen, 1934. And in this critical position, white is threatening mate in 3, starting with the move 1 queen f8 check. However, it's black to move. Can he do anything to stop this? Well, imagine that black's pawn weren't on c2. What would he do? He'd probably play rook takes f2 check, wouldn't he? Can he achieve this? This is a very significant clue. Did you find 1 queen h1 check? Ah, you say, but this puts the queen on pre. Well, yes, that's true, but it does, in effect, clear the way for black's pawn to advance with tempo, because after the forced 2 king takes h1, c1 equals queen check. The move king g2 fails to queen c6 check, and after king h2, rook takes f2 check is curtains for white. That's rather nice, but also rather thematic. White's king turned out to be more vulnerable than black's. Diagram 16, position 7. Some of you may have seen this position. I won't give the names of the players, this might be too big a clue, but in effect it's white to move and win. Stand by for a clue. This is Fischer against Benko from the USA Championship 1964, and it's a rather famous example of a blocking play. White plays one rook f6, double exclamation mark. Very pretty move this. White wants to mate on h7, but the immediate attempt to do so with one e5 is frustrated by one f5 by black, uncovering an attack against the queen at h5 and blocking the action of the bishop on d3. After rook f6, this defensive device is no longer available for black, and he played king g8, but now white advanced to e5, and this was decisive. Black had to stop mate with h6, and the quiet move 3 knight e2 decided the game. Look at this closely. Can you see that if black's knight moves, queen f5 forces mate? Play this over carefully again. We've been looking at middle game positions and problems, which I hoped you were enjoying studying. And we come to the final position in this short series, position 8, that's diagram 17 on your diagram sheets. This is by far the most difficult, but I do feel that you ought to be stretched a little bit, so take as much time as you think you need. It's white to play and win. The clue is that white has to break through somehow. Try and see if you can find a way of breaking through in the centre. Did you find one bishop takes d5? This is the key to the solution behind this problem or position. After bishop takes d5, black played e takes d5. He couldn't play rook takes d5 because of the spectacular 2 queen d8 check, forcing mate. Have a look at that if you don't believe me. After e takes d5, white continued this breakthrough by playing 2 e6. We go right back to the start of the tape where I was talking about mobilising the entire attacking force, and this is what white is doing here. Black played f takes e6, 3 queen takes e6 check was played, king f8, 4 bishop h6 check. Can you see how white achieved his objective? Black blocked with the rook on g8, rook to g7, 5 rook e1, no hurry, rook e7, 3 queen to f6 check, and black played king e8. Remember this position, and we'll play king g8 instead for black. In this case, white would have finished him off with 7 bishop takes g7, rook takes g7, 8 rook e8 check, king h7, 9 queen h4 check, and that's mate. If you don't know the basic mates, don't go on. You must have this framework, this foundation of information, the most basic knowledge before we proceed, and before we can proceed with any confidence. The biggest fault that I've found with people who want to improve is they're very anxious to go plunging into the intricacies of some variation, or this endgame study or that endgame study, or complex rook endgame, but it's not the proper way to do it. And if you're training yourself, we're concentrating on finding the best ways to do this. So let's have a look now at the endgame of bishop and knight against king. Take all your pieces off the board and put a white knight on a8, a white bishop on g1, a white king on a1, and put the black king on e4. Now you'll quickly see that the white pieces are displaced to all corners of the board and the black king's in the centre. So in a sense, in as far as he can, black has achieved his ideal position. And our task as white is to mate the black king. Well, we all know that we have to corner the black king, but do you know first of all which corner you have to go to? It's really amazing when I've set this problem to people how they immediately head for the corner to the opposite colour of the white bishop. And then they suddenly find when they're there that their 50 moves are running out, and then the 50 moves do run out. And okay, the black king's still trapped on the side, but they're no nearer to mating than they were some 20 moves ago, or something like that. So I must emphasise that the first point is that the black king must be driven to the same colour square as the white bishop is on. Okay, if the white bishop is on a black square, the king's got to be mated in a corner where the square is black. Very simple thing, but a lot of players don't know this. How do we drive the king, the black king, to the side of the board? Very much a question of establishing a cordon. We've got to imprison the black king, surround it, deny it the opportunity to break out into the middle of the board. To do this, we have to utilise all of the pieces we have at our disposal. The bishop's got to be covering black squares, the knight has to be covering white, the king has to be slowly hemming the black king in. It's a continuous and very logical process, but how many of us know how to do this? A study of simple endgames of this type extends our knowledge of the way that chess pieces move and precisely what they're capable of. How many of us know the actual properties of the pieces? This is what we must learn, what they can actually do before we can go on. So we'll have a look at this position now. It takes a long time, this endgame. It takes some 33, 34, 35 moves, usually. But you should do it quite easily from any position before 50 moves. This is one of the worst positions that white can have. But it's as well to try and memorise the process by which white corners the black king. So let's go on. First of all, white brings up his pieces. 1 king b2, king d3, 2 knight c7, king c4, 3 knight e6, king d5, 4 knight d4, king c4, and white plays 5, king c2. So we can see that in 5 moves, white has made gradual progress. He's improved the position of his knight, which was way out on a8, and his king is gradually coming to the centre. Already, black is slightly restricted in his choice of squares. Black plays king b4. He could play king d5. In that case, white continues with 6 king d3, as indeed he does after king b4. White plays 6 king d3. king c5, 7 bishop h2. Now I'm sure it's this type of quiet move which most players tend to miss in this endgame. The concept of cutting off squares from the black king is very important. Notice that the white knight on a black square is covering all the white squares. So the bishop and knight will generally be on the same colour square, but they control different colours. In this endgame, when you want to set up a cordon, try and arrange your pieces in this way. Bishop on a black square, knight on a black square. You'll find it much more easy if you can remember this type of formula to actually trap the black king. So the next few moves see white making further progress. Black played 7 king d5, 8 knight b3. We've got to tempo to drive the king back. King c6, 9 king c4, king b6, 10 knight c5. Again, the white knight takes up a dominating position in front of the white king on a black square, controlling a lot of the white squares. And now I want you to stop and see how the black king is slowly being restricted, and this only after 10 moves. We're driving the king to the side. We'll go on. 10 knight c6, 11 knight a4, another tempo move, king b7, 12 king b5, and now you can see, finally the black king is driven to the side. He played king c8, 13 king c6, king d8, 14 king d6, king c8. Okay, black had a choice there, but he didn't want to run towards the black corner, so he runs away. We know that white can't mate if the black king is standing in a white squared corner, so black's defence is quite logical. Okay, but now what should white do? Turn off your tape recorder and look at this endgame a little more closely. How do you think white should proceed? White played 15 knight b6 check, king b7, 16 king c5. So does that surprise you that he's let the black king off the back rank? Well, yes, but it's this difficulty of taking one step back to take 2 steps forward that confuses a lot of people in this endgame. It's true that black's king has come off the back rank, but can you see that his way is being barred here, even more than it was before? So after king b7, king c5, king a6 was played. 17 king c6, king a5, 18 bishop d6, king a6, 19 bishop b8. And now, just as it seemed that black was going to be driven across to h8 and be mated, we quickly see that the king is going to be driven up the a file because the white bishop has barred its path, and now king a5 is forced. 20 knight d5, king a4, make a run for it. 21 king c5, king b3. Has black escaped? 22 knight b4, king c3. Has black escaped now? 23 bishop f4. And before you go any further, I want you to memorise this position. Now essentially what white has done is to establish a cordon around the black king. And it's very important to understand that there's nowhere now that black can go. There's no route out to the H file or G file anymore, because the king can't come to C2 or to C1, and there's no escape via D3. The knight covers that square. So although the bishop's a long way away, it does control very important squares, and the knight on B4 is performing a very important function. Here we see almost perfect coordination of the white force. Please memorise this position. I can't stress how important it is. This is the sort of thing you must be aiming for in this endgame. In this particular case, it's taken us 23 moves to get here. Quite complex. King B3, bishop E5, again cutting the king off. King comes back to the A file. King C4, King A5, 26 bishop C7 check, King A4, 27 knight D3, King A3, 28 bishop B6, King A4, 29 knight B2 check, King A3, 30 King C3, King A2. Now suddenly everything becomes clear. The game finishes 31 King C2, King A3, 32 bishop C5 check, King A2, 33 knight D3, a final quiet move to drive the king into the corner, King A1, 34 bishop B4, King A2, 35 knight C1 check, King A1, and 36 bishop C3 mate. Now those of you who fling up your hands in horror about remembering a 36 move sequence, it's not as difficult as it seems, because there are a few basic ideas which run through the whole process, which you must remember. The cornering of the king, the establishing of a cordon, the knowledge of the right corner, the colour of the bishop, the way in which bishop and knight interact. If you can remember these ideas, the whole process becomes a lot simpler. And until you've mastered the very basic endgames, please don't go any further, because you'll only be confusing yourself. A further illustration of this. Let's look at another very simple endgame. Again, clear the board of pieces, please, and put a white pawn on F2, a white king on F1, and a black king on F6. Well, you couldn't have a more simpler position than this, could you? Only 3 pieces on the board. But my first question to you is, do you know what's happening in this position? Alright, we all know black's not going to win. But is the position a draw, or is it a win? It's white to move, and he plays 1 king E2. Right, what's the result here? Consider this question before going on. And look at it. If you want to train yourself, look at this position first. In fact, there's only one correct move for black here. And that is 1 king E6. Obviously white has got to queen his pawn somehow, but we're trying to frustrate him from bringing his king into the game as black. White's obviously trying to do this, and therefore the moves king f5 or king e5 on move 1 lead to a loss, because white seizes the opposition after 1 king e5, king e3, or king f5, king f3, after which white wins. If you don't think white wins, you can verify yourself, analyse it out. But the move 1 king e6 makes all the difference, because white has no way now of seizing the opposition. 2 king f3 is meant by 2 king e6 to f5, and 2 king e3 is met by 2 king e6 to e5, and in this case black provokes the white pawn to advance, which leads to a draw. Again, please verify this for yourself. I'm not going to do all the work for you on this tape, because this is a very simple endgame. You should be able to see, with only this limited amount of pieces on the board, what's happening. But it was least obscure in the position right back when the king was on f1 and the king was on f6. So the position is in fact a draw with white to move, and I would hope that most of you knew how to draw it. As a rider to this, what would happen in the starting position if white played 1 king g2? Well, I would hope that most of you played 1 king g6. The analogous situation applies. 2 king f3 is answered by king f5, 2 king g3 is answered by 2 king g5, 2 king h3 is answered by 2 king h5. In each case, black draws. You may have found this more simple than the first example of bishop and knight against king, but again, two very basic positions which you should know, especially if you're trying to improve your game. So there we are, the most basic guidelines I can give you about how to tackle the initial study or a study of the endgame. So, you've received a fair bit of advice on this tape about how to train yourself, and hopefully now you'll be able to see how things are taking shape. What I've tried to give you is the makings of some sort of system, and hopefully you're in a better position now to assess your strengths and weaknesses as a chess player, to see how you play in relation to others, and to take steps to increasing both your enjoyment and your skill at the game. Having said all this, I'd like to leave you with a thought, and that is that when you're improving, you shouldn't worry too much about results. I'm basing this on experience of what other people have told me, actually, that as soon as you start to worry about your results, a lot of the pleasure goes out of chess. If you genuinely wish to improve, you will be expecting to improve your results alongside that of the improvement in your play. But it doesn't always work out like that. In the short term, I've found that most people who genuinely wish to improve have to face that their results will actually get worse before they get better. This is because when you acquire a lot of information, or you're trying to improve at chess, you're concentrating on different areas. You're not actually concentrating totally on winning the game. You're concentrating on strengthening your game to the point at which you understand the game much more. So be confident that if you're doing the right things, your results will improve actually, but in the long term. Don't worry about losing a few games. You will improve your results in the long term. And be confident you're training yourself in the correct way. So we've come to the end of this tape. Apart from training yourself, what can you do to help yourself as a chess player? Well, first and foremost, I would recommend simply playing chess. There's no substitute whatsoever for over-the-board play or correspondence play, actual play of the game. You learn an enormous amount through playing. So try and play as much as possible if you want to improve, whether it be in a congress chess or in club matches or even in friendlies. Try to play with the clock as much as possible, and try to play blitz as much as possible. I feel that blitz played in the proper way is a useful aid to improvement, especially if you're trying out opening variations or assessing your ability, your technique in certain positions. Don't actually use blitz as an ego trip trying to win every game, but try and experiment. Quite a useful tip, that. Try and talk about chess with other people. A lot of strong players that I know make a big mistake. They try and hog their ideas all to themselves. I feel that this is not the right way to go about it. You should discuss as fully and as much as possible with other people, so that you acquire a better perspective of how they look at chess. You can incorporate the best of their ideas for yourself, and you can see their faults more clearly, hopefully. This type of discussion develops your own attitude towards chess. And I'll just reiterate how important I think it is for you to have an attitude towards chess, for you to have a philosophy, for you to have a reason for actually playing the game, whether it be enjoyment, pleasure, or the need to win, or whatever. So please, discuss your ideas with other people, and you might find that your enjoyment increases. Finally, of the suggested aids that you can use, for instance books or whatever, I find that the audio chess method is very good. Again, if you're really feeling ambitious, as a supplement to your learning from books or from tapes or from actually playing, you might like to take tuition from a strong player. This can also be very useful if you've got the funds to do this, to see how a strong player thinks, to see what he understands, what his ideas are about the game. Very useful to you if you want to improve. So now we have come to the end of this tape. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that now you will go away and feel confident about being able to train yourself that much better. Good luck.